I'm Jonasz. Welcome on board the Eastern Express, and as always, I hope you enjoy the journey ahead. Armenia and Azerbaijan are making historic strides towards ending decades of conflict, and for the first time, they're doing it without Moscow. As the Kremlin drowns in Ukraine and loses its grip on the South Caucasus, new players rise, old alliances crumble, and democracy dares to reassert itself. The South Caucasus, once one of Russia's most loyal geopolitical chessboards, is now becoming the scene of its most humiliating retreat. But with every step towards peace, Putin's shadow grows darker, because when Russia cannot mediate, it destabilizes. So without further ado, let's take a look at our latest report to find out more.
The efforts to achieve a peace deal between Armenia and Azerbaijan are nothing if not burdened by the weight of the country's shared history. Although a draft deal was agreed upon months ago, the recent talks in the UAE between the two sides have not yielded anything concrete. The Azerbaijani side seems quite keen on a deal, especially since it comes on the heels of a string of victories, such as the capture of Nagorno-Karabakh.
The return of their historical lands to Azerbaijani people is a new success for our state. Our enemies would never let this happen.
That isn't to say that there isn't a will to strike a deal on Armenia's side either. While Yerevan's government is keen on accomplishing that, its population comes across as far more skeptical about Azerbaijan's intentions.
Even if a peace treaty is signed, there will be no peace between Armenia and Azerbaijan, because Azerbaijan's intentions are not peaceful at all.
Although major hostilities between the two sides have ceased, observers are cautious as to how long this vulnerable peace can last without a formal agreement. It wouldn't be the first time a peace deal was drafted, agreed on, and then tossed into diplomatic limbo with matters left unresolved.
And now we're zoning in on the East-splaining portion of our show. The tensions and conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan go back several decades. The countries have fought a series of wars since the late 1980s, mostly revolving around the Nagorno-Karabakh region. The path to peace between them is long and fraught with social, cultural, and historic disagreements.
Peace talks began after Azerbaijan captured Nagorno-Karabakh in a lightning offensive in late 2023. This prompted the exile of thousands of ethnic Armenians from the region. While Azerbaijan holds this territory, a stumbling block is the fact that Azerbaijan demands that Armenia change its constitution. Baku says that the document lays claim to what it declares as Azerbaijani territory. Another point of contention is that Azerbaijan demands a transit corridor through Armenia to link its main territory of Nakhchivan, an Azerbaijani exclave that borders Turkey. Yerevan sees this as a violation of its sovereignty, on the other hand. The border itself remains a problem, as Armenia wants a full border demarcation and demilitarization, while Azerbaijan wants full control without international peacekeepers and the dismantling of key Armenian military positions. In essence, Armenia is more interested in a solution that would involve strong international mediation, while Azerbaijan prefers a more regionalized approach, with its particular demands being met unconditionally.
And now we're zooming in on Yerevan and Baku to explore the issue in greater detail. After decades of bloodshed, propaganda and proxy warfare, Armenia and Azerbaijan are moving towards peace. Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan and President Ilham Aliyev sat down in the United Arab Emirates to finalize what could become a turning point in post-Soviet history. A bilateral peace deal negotiated without Russia. No Kremlin, no Lavrov, no guarantor of stability narrative. Just two countries emerging from decades of war and deciding they don't need Moscow's permission anymore. And that's exactly what terrifies Putin. This is the first formal bilateral meeting between Armenia and Azerbaijan since they agreed on the text of a peace deal. It is historic, not just for the peace it may deliver, but for who is being left out. Russia is watching from the sidelines, abandoned by both sides, and reduced to issuing empty threats and fanning the flames of disinformation. Once seen as the all-powerful arbiter of the Caucasus, Russia has become irrelevant, overstretched in Ukraine. Distrusted by former allies and unable to deliver when it mattered most, the Kremlin is now resorting to its fallback strategy, namely sabotage. Let's be clear, this didn't happen overnight. The turning point came in 2020, when Armenia realized that Russia was not the ally it claimed to be. As Azerbaijani forces retook territory in Karabakh during a 6-week war, Moscow watched and did nothing. No intervention, no defense of Armenian allies. Then came 2023. Azerbaijan launched a lightning campaign to reclaim full control of Karabakh. And again, Russia stayed out. So now, with Russia fully absorbed by its failing war in Ukraine, the South Caucasus is doing what was once unthinkable, solving its own problems. And Putin, he's watching his empire of influence disintegrate. But don't expect Moscow to go quietly. In Armenia, Kremlin-linked actors have launched not one, but two coordinated disinformation campaigns. One claims that Russia is ramping up its military presence in Armenia, a claim Armenia swiftly denied. The other one? That Armenia is secretly hosting American bioweapon labs. Sounds familiar? It's the same tinfoil script Russia used against Ukraine before the 2022 invasion. Putin may be losing grip, but the danger lies in what happens next. What happens after Ukraine? What happens when Russia, wounded and vengeful, seeks to reassert its dominance? The vacuum of power in the South Caucasus could be filled by diplomacy or destabilization. Russia knows this, and it's already stirring the pot, because peace in the South Caucasus doesn't just free Armenia and Azerbaijan, it ends Russia's myth of being indispensable. And if two longtime enemies can do that in Abu Dhabi without Russian permission, maybe the rest of Russia's neighbors are closer to freedom than they think. And now here to shed more light on the issue is Konrad Zasztoft, assistant professor at the University of Warsaw. Hello and welcome to Eastern Express.
Hello.
So that meeting between Nikol Pashinyan and Ilham Aliyev, do you think it can actually be a breakthrough of sorts? What could it lead to in the long run?
I wouldn't use the term breakthrough, but generally what we see in Armenian-Azerbaijani relationship in recent months or even years, it's a breakthrough. It's a breakthrough because the two sides are very slowly, I have to admit, very slowly, but they are going into the direction of the peace treaty, and what both sides need at the moment is a peace treaty at the end of the conflict, which has lasted since 1992, since the collapse of the Soviet Union. Actually, it even started earlier. But now there is a historical opportunity for the both sides to reach this peace in the region, and this is very important. And I would also add that the South Caucasus region, which is 3 countries, it's not only Armenia, Azerbaijan, it's also Georgia, is becoming more and more important in terms of geoeconomics, because it's a kind of a bridge between Europe and Asia, and especially at the moment when we have war in Ukraine to the north of South Caucasus, we have a Middle Eastern conflict to the south of South Caucasus. The importance of the South Caucasus region is even bigger at the moment. Yes,
it's gaining in significance. It's probably not the greatest moment to lose influence in such a region then. I am, of course, taking a jab here at Moscow.
Yes, but Moscow lost influence in the South Caucasus region with the start at least with the start of the war of Russian aggression in Ukraine, but maybe even earlier, because Moscow was preparing for a long time to this invasion to Ukraine, and part of this preparation was this diplomatic attempt to have good relationship with other neighbors like Turkey, like Azerbaijan, to focus, that was like Moscow's aim, to focus on Ukraine. That's why Kremlin lost its influence in South Caucasus, but this is of course opportunity for the countries of the region to develop different relationship with different partners like Turkey, like Central Asia, to build this economic trade route, which I already mentioned, the so-called Middle Corridor, which is one of the most important projects of especially Azerbaijan foreign policy. So this is an opportunity for the countries of the region.
This loss of influence, now it didn't happen overnight, did it? It began with Armenia, right? Because Armenia was really expecting some sort of support from Russia when it was at war with Azerbaijan. That support did not materialize. But even when Russia was aware that Armenia is beginning to look like a lost cause, it has then begun to actually spoil its relationship with Azerbaijan as well. Wouldn't you say that this comes across as being rather reckless? I mean, first there was the Azerbaijani airliner that was shot down over Chechnya and crashed in Kazakhstan. And later on you had this, this business with all these arrests and the deaths and the way that Russia has treated Azerbaijan in the course of the dispute that followed.
On one hand, it's surprising because Russia used to have very effective diplomacy, not only in the South Caucasus region, but also elsewhere, like just to mention, Russian diplomats, they speak a lot of foreign languages of the region. But on the other hand, Russian diplomacy is still spoiled by this kind of neo-imperial thinking. So this is, of course, perceived in the region as something which is not acceptable, yes, because at the moment Azerbaijan is a sovereign, different country, so they cannot accept this kind of treatment from the side of Russia.
Someone has actually made a remark once that the further from Russia you are, the more effective their diplomacy is. They seem to understand the intricacies of countries located really far away and different cultures fairly well. However, when it comes to former Soviet Union, it no longer works that way. It seems like the approach is much less subtle. Would you agree with that?
Well, I think they still have very skillful diplomacy in Moscow, but the problem is that the general direction of Russian foreign policy is going nowhere, actually, because they have actually when we look at the South Caucasus region, they used to play this conflict between Azerbaijan and Armenia, and one time having better relationship with Armenia, other times with Azerbaijan. But at the moment they spoiled relationship with both countries, so that shows that their policy is a disaster at the moment.
And where does it leave Azerbaijan and Armenia? Because they, as we've pointed out, they are working out this peace treaty. But there are differences between them still. Would you say that perhaps not animosity yet, but at least the deep, profound disappointment with Russia and the desire to actually leave Russia in the past, would it be enough to make them overcome these differences?
No, of course not. These differences, I mentioned that the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict started with the collapse of the Soviet Union and even earlier in the late 1980s, but if we go more deep into the history, it started in 19th century, beginning of 20th century. But on the other hand, I should say, as a cultural anthropologist, it's both cultures are very close to each other, so they have a lot of similarities. So when this conflict eventually ends, I think both nations, both Armenians and Azerbaijanis, they can find a common language.
So you wouldn't say that the resentment is going to linger? Like, there are many differences. There are issues concerning like burial sites in Nagorno-Karabakh. There are claims that Azerbaijan is erasing the cultural legacy of the Armenians who lived there for centuries. And I mean, let me give you an example, why I'm asking this question. The Srebrenica massacre 30 years ago. The event happened 30 years ago, and still there are disagreements over that. So now the takeover of Nagorno-Karabakh by Azerbaijan Would you say that in 30 years reconciliation will be complete or quite the contrary?
Well, of course, yes, many political scientists compare the Balkan regions to South Caucasus regions, and these conflicts, these wars, ethnic conflicts, they are probably equally bloody and difficult, and the memory is very difficult for both sides. So I don't expect the immediate reconciliation, but I think without Russia there are a lot of chances for this.
And where does this actually leave the rest of the broader region, so to say? Do you think that there could be a domino effect and countries, for example, like, I don't know, Kazakhstan, might actually feel, okay, so if this is how it works, first of all, Russia is not an ally anyone can rely on. Second thing, it's not doing anything to change its position unless there is some sort of backlash from Russia with respect to Azerbaijan or Armenia.
Well, I think you mentioned Kazakhstan, which is a country part of a neighboring region, Central Asia, but still a post-Soviet region, and with a very similar situation comparing to the South Caucasus. So we already see that they have this kind of foreign policy, which is aimed at more sovereignty, more security, but security based on other partnerships, other allies than Russia.
The opportunities for China, for example, right?
Of course, China is in case of Central Asia, is becoming stronger, and also in South Caucasus, China is an important country. But South Caucasus is in the middle of, in between two continents, Europe and Asia. So for Azerbaijan, of course, Turkey is the most important ally.
And we often speak about how Russia wants to try and embarrass NATO, and yet we seem to be forgetting that Russia's perhaps not equivalent, but Russia's so-called answer to NATO, the CSTO. Now, this is a complete paper tiger by now. Does anyone even treat this organization seriously?
Well, CSTO was always a kind of organization, as you said, a paper tiger, and Russia's policy led to expansion of NATO. So we have Sweden and Finland in NATO, and when we look at the South Caucasus, of course, Azerbaijan is not a part of Northern Alliance, but it's in a very close alliance with Turkey, which is a crucial member of the alliance. So in practical terms, we can look at Azerbaijan as maybe not a part of NATO, but very country which is very close to NATO.
And a very quick question, because we cannot overlook one matter, the Zangezur corridor. Do you think that this could actually be a deal breaker? Coming back to the relations between Azerbaijan and Armenia.
Yes, this is one of these important points in this negotiation, but there are other points and more symbolic ones related to this reconciliation between two countries. So, for example, the changes in the constitution of Armenia. But yes, Zangezur is also important, but we should also remember that Azerbaijan has this route through Georgia to Turkey, so Zangezur is like another option, but it's not the only one option.
Professor Konrad Zasztoft was our guest today here on Eastern Express. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your insight. And now we're moving on to Eastern News Flash, a curated selection of all the other stories from the East that you absolutely don't want to miss. Ukraine's security service, the SBU, has detained 2 Chinese nationals suspected of trying to steal classified military technology. The tech in question is related to Ukraine's Neptune cruise missile system.
Reported foreign interference in the war in Ukraine continues to surge. This time, according to the SBU, 2 individuals, a former student of a technical university in Kiev and his father, were apparently gathering secret documentation. Their intent was to legally transfer the sensitive data to Chinese intelligence. The younger man reportedly attempted to recruit a Ukrainian national who had access to classified defense technology relating to the Neptune missile system. This is not the first time that Chinese nationals have been caught carrying out suspicious activities during the war or outright being involved in it. In April, Volodymyr Zelensky informed that Ukraine captured 2 Chinese soldiers who were fighting alongside Russian troops. Officially, Beijing claims impartiality when it comes to Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine.
Authorities in Russia's Nizhny Novgorod region have partially lifted a ban on migrant labor. The decision concerns only certain sectors, where local businesses filed complaints over severe staffing shortages.
In late March 2025, the region's governor issued a ban on foreign nationals, many of them from Central Asia, from working in 37 sectors. Yet now, just barely more than 3 months later, regional authorities now say that migrants will be allowed to work in key parts of the economy. These include food service, shipping, hospitality, catering, and several others. There are currently an estimated 20,000 migrants being employed in the Nizhny Novgorod region. Russian regions began imposing restrictions on migrant labor in the wake of the 2024 Crocus City Hall attack. Prior to the incident, only 9 Russian regions had imposed bans on migrant labor. Since 2015, Russian regional authorities have had the power to greatly restrict foreign employment for up to 1 year to prioritize and give favorable conditions to Russian citizens.
Belarusian authorities have apparently designated the government in exile led by Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya as a terrorist organization. The Lukashenko regime often pins that label on various organizations which oppose his policies.
The government in exile, formerly called the United Transitional Cabinet, was initially branded as extremist by Minsk in 2022. It was founded in August of that same year to challenge Alexander Lukashenko's rule and push for a peaceful transition of power after the 2020 presidential elections, which are widely seen as rigged. Tsikhanouskaya had stepped in as the main opposition candidate in those elections after her husband Syarhey was arrested by Belarusian authorities. She herself was forced into exile after Lukashenko declared victory. Labels of terrorist or extremist, much like they are in Russia, are a way for the Belarusian regime to ban the activity of organizations and groups that it finds troublesome.
And for this episode of Eastern Express, it's the end of the line. Please stay with us here on TVP World for more latest news and updates.